Dennis Nilsen, aka the Muswell Hill murderer, also the British Jeffrey Dahmer, was a serial killer who terrorized London during the late 1970s and early 80s. Over a span of 5 years, Dennis lured and murdered at least 12 young men, shocking the nation with his heinous crimes. He targeted vulnerable young men, often homeless or living on the margins of society. Dennis would lure them to his home under the pretense of offering food, shelter, or companionship. Once inside, he drugged them before strangling or drowning them. After the murders, Dennis would engage in disturbing post-mortem rituals. He would bathe and dress the bodies, keeping them in his home for extended periods, and engage in sexual acts with the corpses. Then he would dissect the body before disposing of the remains by burning them or flushing them down a toilet. Dennis's horrific crimes eventually came to light in 1983 when human remains were discovered clogging the drains of his home. The police arrested him, and during the investigation, he confessed to the murders, providing gruesome details of each killing. Dennis's trial began in October 1983. He was convicted on all 6 counts of murder and 2 attempted murders and sentenced to life in prison. Over the years, he was granted interviews and wrote about his crimes. He died in prison on May 12, 2018 due to complications from a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, also known as the Toolbox Killers, were a deadly duo who abducted, tortured, and murdered at least 5 teenage girls between June and October 1979. No strangers to the prison system, the duo displayed traits of sadism and psychopathy. They met at the California Men's Colony Prison in '77, discovering a common interest in sexual violence and misogyny. When alone, the pair discussed ideas to assault and murder teenage girls after they were released. This shared fantasy evolved into an elaborate plan. The pair vowed to become reacquainted once they were released. In order for the pair to abduct the girls, Bittaker decided they would need a van. Bittaker purchased a silver gray GMC van in '79. The pair would nickname this van Murder Mac. They would cruise around searching for vulnerable victims. Once they had a victim in their clutches, they would drive to a remote location where the unthinkable would take place. Their toolbox contained items like pliers, ice picks, and sledgehammers, which they used to sadistically torture their victims before ending their lives. As one of the bodies were discovered, a relentless investigation began. They were eventually arrested on November 20, 1979. In '81, Bittaker and Norris were found guilty of their crimes and sentenced to death. They both died in prison. Charles N.G. and Leonard Lake became infamous during the 1980s and early 90s for a series of abductions, torture, and murders. Lake was born in San Francisco. He was medically discharged from the Marines after being diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. He was obsessed with porn and even appeared in amateur movies, usually involving bondage or S&M. N.G. was born in Hong Kong. He had enlisted in the Marines to avoid prosecution from a hit and run. After less than a year, he was arrested by military police for stealing automatic weapons. N.G. escaped custody in 1980 and made his way back to Northern California, where he met Leonard Lake. Leonard's property became their dungeon, where they built an underground bunker. Lake and N.G. targeted women, but were not hesitant to abduct entire families. After killing the victims, they would either bury them or burn them and scatter the bones throughout the property. Their reign of terror came to an end when they were arrested. Lake committed suicide by taking cyanide shortly after his arrest, but N.G. was captured. Police found over 40 pounds of burned, crushed bone fragments scattered around the property. Charles N.G. was convicted of murdering 11 people, but because of the massive amount of bone fragments found, they are thought to have killed as many as 25. In '99, N.G. was sentenced to death. As of 2023, he remains on death row. Lucy Letby was born on January 4, 1990 in Hereford, England. As a young girl, she always wanted to be a nurse responsible for newborns. Lucy began working as a registered nurse at the neonatal unit in 2012. In 2016, consultants asked management to remove Lucy from clinical duties pending an investigation into her conduct, after previously being removed from 2 other units. After being arrested and released on bail, she was rearrested on November 11, 2020, charged with 8 counts of murder and 10 attempts. It was said that Lucy would murder the babies by injecting air into their bloodstream, overfeeding them, poisoning them with insulin, or assaulting them with medical tools. A prosecutor said that Lucy was a constant malevolent presence in the hospital's neonatal unit. He stated that Lucy checked up on parents of the deceased babies, which showed signs bordering on sadism. A handwritten note from Lucy was shown during trial, which said, "I am evil. I did this. I killed them on purpose because I couldn't take care of them." A mother of one of the victims said she had walked in on Lucy trying to kill her baby, with Lucy saying, "Trust me, I'm a nurse," when interrupted. Lucy was found guilty of 7 counts of murder and another 7 attempts from 2015 to 2016. On August 21, 2023, she was sentenced to life. Dr. Harold SHIPMAN, aka Dr. Death, was born in England in 1946. From a young age, he exhibited an interest in medicine. He pursued a medical career and eventually became a general practitioner. But behind his facade, SHIPMAN was harboring a sinister secret. Over the course of his medical career, he began to exploit his position of power, taking advantage of the vulnerability of his patients. SHIPMAN's method of murder was administering lethal doses of morphine to his victims, often claiming they needed medication for minor ailments. His victims were mostly elderly women, and their deaths were often attributed to natural causes due to their age. Suspicion surrounding SHIPMAN began to grow as an unusually high number of his patients were dying under his care. It was the unexpected death of one patient, Kathleen Grundy, that led to his downfall. SHIPMAN had forged her will in an attempt to inherit her wealth. This prompted a closer look into his activities. In 1998, Dr. SHIPMAN was arrested and charged with 15 counts of murder with an estimated 250 victims, and 1 count of forgery. SHIPMAN maintained his innocence, but overwhelming evidence linked him to the deaths of 15 patients. In January 2000, SHIPMAN was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. SHIPMAN died by suicide by hanging himself just 4 years later at the age of 57. Joe Metheny was born on March 2, 1955 in Baltimore. He was a serial killer who claimed to have killed 13 people, but sufficient evidence was only found to convict him of 2. Raised in a poor environment, Joe joined the army in '73. He claimed that he had served a tour in Vietnam and had become addicted to heroin during this time. In the '90s, he held a steady job as a truck driver, spending nearly all his money on drugs, living in camps with homeless people. Joe murdered a woman in 1994 and buried her body in a shallow grave. He was tried for murder in a different case in '95 for allegedly killing 2 homeless men with an axe. A jury concluded in July '96 that there was insufficient evidence to convict Joe of murdering the 2. Shortly after being released, he murders 2 sex workers, this time with a better idea for disposing the bodies. Instead of tossing them in the river, he dismembered them, mixed the flesh with beef and pork, and pressed them into patties. He would grill these burgers out of the small barbecue stand he opened. He claims to have received no complaints on the taste. He asked a friend to help him bury a body he had been hiding, but the friend reported it to the police on December 15, 1996, and Joe was arrested and charged with murder the same day. Metheny was sentenced to life with no parole. He was found dead in his cell on August 5, 2017 at the age of 62. Dean Corll, aka the Candyman, was born on December 24, 1939 in Indiana. He was a serial killer who abducted, tortured, and murdered a minimum of 28 boys. He was drafted to the army in '64 and shortly applied for discharge on the grounds that he was needed in his family's business. Dean divulged to some close friends that during this time he realized he was gay and had his first homosexual encounter. Corll's nickname derived from the fact that he worked in his family's candy factory. This occupation gave him easy access to children. Between 1970 and 1973, Dean, along with 2 teenage accomplices, embarked on a brutal murder spree. They would kidnap or lure boys to their home, then strap them to a torture board where the heinous acts began. Each was killed either by strangulation or shooting. One night, his accomplice Elmer Wayne Henley, along with a male friend and his teenage girlfriend, came to spend the night at Dean's murder cabin. Dean was highly upset at this. Henley woke up that night handcuffed and gagged alongside the other 2. Dean was set on killing the 3, but Henley convinced him to let him go so he can join in on the assault instead. The moment Dean turned his back, Henley grabbed the pistol and shot Dean multiple times until his body dropped. While the 3 waited on the porch for the police, Henley told the other male survivor, "If you wasn't my friend, I could have gotten $200 for you." Robert Hansen, aka the Butcher Baker, was born in Iowa on February 15, 1939. He was a serial killer between 1971 and 1983. He was a shy child, practicing both hunting and archery. At age 21, Robert was arrested for the first time for burning down a school bus garage. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. During his incarceration, a psychiatrist diagnosed him with manic depression and periodic schizophrenic episodes. It wasn't until he moved to Alaska in 1967 where he began his most heinous crimes. He did a couple of prison stints for kidnapping, rape attempts, and also larceny. In 1971, his first known murder occurred. He would kidnap young women, mainly sex workers and strippers, and fly them out to a remote location in his private plane, purchased with insurance fraud money. Once there, he would release his victims, naked, and then hunt them down like wild game. A search warrant was issued after a woman escaped and found sanctuary before informing the police. They discovered personal items belonging to his victims, as well as an aviation map. Robert showed investigators 17 grave sites on the map and denied the others. Due to evidence, he was charged with only 4 murders and sentenced to 461 years in prison. Ramon Escobar was born on June 5, 1971 in El Salvador. Very little is known about Ramon's early life, but he was raised in poverty due to the result of the football war back in 1969. While serving a sentence for theft in 2001, Ramon was diagnosed with schizophrenia. From 1997 to 2011, Escobar was deported from the US a total of 6 times. His murders began in August of 2018 when Escobar beat his 65-year-old uncle to death at his home in Houston. After his aunt got suspicious, he strangled her in her own minivan. He dumped the bodies, then burned the van to hide the evidence. A few weeks later, he moves to California where he killed a homeless man. The following year, he attacked 3 more homeless men with baseball bats to rob them. 1 survived, the other 2 died. A week later, he beat another man under the Santa Monica Pier to death. 4 days later, Ramon beat another man to death in downtown Los Angeles with a baseball bat. Minutes after the assault, Ramon was captured by police. They found the bat in his car. He also heavily resembled the facial composites of a man wanted for murders. He was tried and sentenced to life for 7 murders. On February 24, 2023, his cellmate was found dead due to strangulation. As of May 2023, Ramon awaits prosecution for his most recent murder. Robert Lee Yates, aka the Grocery Bag Killer, was born on May 27, 1952 in Washington State. His first 2 murders was in 1975 when he shot a couple enjoying a picnic. The year after that, he got married to his wife Linda, with whom he had 5 children with. In 1977, Yates enlisted in the Army to become a pilot. He served over 20 years before retiring. Instead of enjoying his retirement with his family, he led a double life, killing 13 women alone from 1996 to 1998. High percentage of those were prostitutes he solicited in his Ford van. Most of them had a couple of plastic bags over their head before he shot them multiple times. The bodies were dumped in rural locations throughout Spokane. One of his victims managed to escape and filed a police report for assault and robbery. She described the man's features, vehicle, and status as a National Guard. Yates was arrested on April 18, 2000 for the murder of one of his victims. A search warrant for his car, which was identified, revealed blood linked to one of the murders, and DNA tying Yates to 12 more. He was charged with a total of 15 murders, and thanks to Washington State Supreme Court ruling in 2018, his death penalty was commuted to life in prison without possibility of parole.